3 true creepy stories about fishing trips.
Story 1. The Death Maggots. Frank ground out his 5th cigarette of the morning into the overflowing ashtray resting on the gunwale. Their ancient aluminum boat, the Lady Luck, a bitterly ironic name, drifted lazily on the tar-black water of the misted bayou. The fog was so thick it muffled sound, making the occasional wet scrape of Arthur's oar sound like breaking bone. Nothing, Frank muttered, his voice raw. A week, Arthur. Not a single nibble. Even the mudcats are turning their noses up at our bait. Arthur didn't speak. He was older than Frank, with deeply sunken eyes and skin like cured leather. He was the one who knew the swamp, or at least he used to claim he did. Now his silence was heavier than the fog. Their gas fund jar was almost empty, and so were their wallets. The county's annual fishing contest was only 3 days away, and that $5,000 prize wasn't just hope. It was survival. We'll try again tonight, Arthur finally rasped, his voice dry as dead leaves. But we need different bait, Frank snorted. Different bait? We've used everything. Shrimp, chicken liver, plastic lures, your homemade flies. Nothing works. Arthur turned, his eyes glowing strangely in the gray light. I know bait. Bait the Elder can't refuse. The Elder. That was their name for the swamp's legendary catch. A giant catfish, rumored to be the size of a man. A ghost many had seen but none had landed. Nonsense, Frank said. It's a fairy tale. It's real, Arthur insisted, his voice low. And I know how to catch it. But the price of the bait is dear. He paused, licking his cracked lips. Not in money. The twilight that evening was stained an old, bruised purple. Arthur didn't row toward town, but steered deeper into the flooded cypress forest, to a place where old growth reached out with twisted, bony arms. They stopped at a small rise of land that jutted out of the stagnant water. It was an old, long-forgotten burial ground for the nameless and the outcasts. Most of the graves were just depressions in the earth, marked by only a few listing crooked stones. You're kidding me, Arthur, Frank said, his voice trembling, half from the cold, half from dread. Shut up and grab the shovel, Arthur commanded. They stood before a grave without a marker, only a rotting wooden cross. It was set apart from the others. This is where they buried old Jedediah the beggar, Arthur whispered. Died of the sickness. No one claimed the body. About 2 months ago, Frank felt bile rise in his throat. 2 months. In this heat and humidity. God, Arthur, we can't. $5,000. Arthur cut him off and began to dig. The sound of the shovel hitting the damp soil was the only thing breaking the swamp's silence. The stench hit them almost immediately, a sickly, sweet, nauseating smell of decay. Frank dry-heaved, but he kept the flashlight steady. Desperation had choked out his disgust. They didn't have to dig far. The thin coffin wood splintered easily. Arthur knelt, gloved hands reaching in. Frank couldn't look, but he could hear it. A wet, squirming, rustling sound. A living mass shifting in the dark. There they are, Arthur said, his voice hazy with a morbid mix of triumph and horror. He held a small tin box and began scooping them in with the shovel. Frank risked a glance. He wished he hadn't. They weren't ordinary maggots. They were enormous, the size of a man's thumb, pale white, almost translucent. And they were glowing, a faint, sickly, phosphorescent glow. They writhed and convulsed over Jedediah's rotting flesh. The death maggots, Arthur whispered, the name sounding like a curse, nourished on sorrow and forgetting. Frank turned away and vomited. It was the dead of night. The fog seemed to solidify into a white wall. Their boat was anchored in the deepest part of the swamp. The tin box sat between them, and even with the lid shut, Frank could hear the faint scuttling inside. Hurry up, Frank said. Let's just get this over with. Arthur opened the box. The stench was worse than the grave. The pale greenish-white glow cast an eerie light on the two men's faces. Frank managed to hook one. It was cold and convulsed violently in his hand. As the hook pierced it, it didn't die. It seemed to squirm harder, They cast their lines. The bait sank into the black water, leaving a faint, morbid trail of luminescence. For 5 minutes, nothing. Only the frantic pounding of Frank's heart. And then, the water around Arthur's line began to bubble, as if someone had poured acid into it. His rod was pulled down, bent almost double. The pull was so powerful it nearly dragged Arthur out of the boat. "I got him," he screamed, the sound half triumph, half terror. "I got him!" "Frank, help me!" Frank grabbed the gaff. The fight was savage. It wasn't a fish fighting. It was a monster. It spun the aluminum boat like a toy. Arthur was howling, his knuckles white. After 10 agonizing minutes, it surfaced. It was enormous, true to the legend. Easily over 200 pounds. But it wasn't its size that made Frank scream. It was its texture. The catfish had no scales. Its skin was pale gray, slick and bloated, like the skin of a waterlogged corpse. Its eyes were not fish eyes. They were milky white orbs, identical to the dead eyes of Jedediah that Frank had glimpsed in the grave. And it stank. The smell of the grave, the smell of the maggots. It opened its colossal mouth, and inside, Frank saw no fish teeth. He saw things wriggling. Thousands of the death maggots writhing, coating its throat. "Let it go," Frank shrieked, fumbling for his bait knife. "Arthur, cut the line! Cut the line now!" But Arthur was mesmerized. He stared at the fish with a ghastly, triumphant smile. $5,000, the fish thrashed, hitting the side of the boat. A spray of putrid water splashed up, hitting Arthur's face. He yelled not from fear, but from pain. He released the rod and clutched his face. Frank snatched the rod, sliced the line. The Leviathan sank, leaving a wake of sickly glowing water. "Arthur, are you okay?" Arthur slowly lowered his hands. The swamp water had washed his face, but where the water had splashed, on his cheek, on his forehead, his skin was blistering. It burns," Arthur whispered. Frank yanked the engine cord. The boat roared to life and sped toward the shore, leaving the fog-choked bayou behind them. They never spoke of the fishing contest again. Frank dropped Arthur at his shack and left without a word. That night, Frank couldn't sleep. He took a shower. He scrubbed his skin until it was raw, but he couldn't wash away the smell. The smell of damp soil. The smell of putrefaction. He tried to eat, but everything tasted like sludge. He began to hear it. The scuttling, rustle like the maggots in the tin box. It came from the walls. It came from under the floorboards. Frank screamed, turning on every light. Nothing. But the sound didn't stop. The next day, he called Arthur. No answer. He called again. Still nothing. A cold dread gripped Frank. He drove to Arthur's dilapidated shack on the edge of the swamp. The door was unlocked. The house was silent, but not an empty silence. It was a waiting silence, and the smell. Oh God, the smell. "Arthur?" Frank called, his voice breaking. He heard a noise. Not rustling, a wet, rhythmic dripping. From the bathroom, Frank pushed the door open. Arthur was there. He was in the tub. The tub was empty, waterless. He was still alive. His eyes were wide open, staring at the ceiling. He didn't seem to recognize Frank. The blisters where the swamp water hit had spread. His entire face was a bloated, pale mass, and he was leaking. From every pore on his body, from his eyes, nose, ears, from the cracks in his skin, thousands of tiny white maggots were oozing out. They weren't glowing anymore. They were just hungry. They dropped into the tub with a wet pitter-patter. As Frank watched in terrified silence, Arthur turned his head. "It's hungry," he whispered. Not in his voice, but in a dry, rasping hiss. And then his mouth opened. Not in a scream. It just opened, and a torrent of white, wriggling maggots poured out, covering his chin and chest. Frank fled. He ran out of the house, vomiting on the lawn, and drove away, never looking back. Frank told me this story from a brightly lit hospital room in a psychiatric ward. They found him weeks later, wandering down the highway, malnourished and dehydrated. He says he's fine here. At least the lights are always on. They think I'm crazy, he told me, his voice eerily calm. They don't understand. They can't hear. Hear what? I asked. The rustling, he whispered. It never stops. It's in the walls. It's in my food. He raised a hand and scratched his forearm, a compulsive, persistent scratch. But the worst part is, he continued, leaning forward, is when I feel them. Feel them where, Frank? He looked me dead in the eye, a sickening smile stretching across his gaunt face. He held up one finger. Under my skin, he said, as he dragged his fingernail hard across his arm. Beneath the scratched skin, just before the blood welled up, I saw it. Or maybe I only imagined it. Something small, white, and moving. Story 2, The Thrum from Deep Lake. My name is Ben. I'm 34 and I live in Portland, Oregon. At the time, I was a software developer. Stress, constant deadlines, and staring at a screen 10 hours a day. My escape, my sanctuary, was fishing. I'm not talking about charter boats. I'm talking about the quiet, meditative kind. Alone, I sought out isolation. I had an old Toyota Tacoma, and on weekends, I'd drive to the most remote places I could find. The fewer cell bars, the better. That's how I found it. Wailing Lake. The name should have been a warning, right? But online, it wasn't called that. I was deep in a local fishing forum. There was this one buried thread from a user who hadn't been active in 5 years. The title was, The Best Spot You've Never Heard of. The user, PDX Angler 88, had written a single post. He talked about an off-the-grid place, a high mountain lake somewhere in the Umpqua National Forest. He said the old logging road to it was almost impassable, but the reward was unbelievable. Monster trout, he wrote. Big as your arm. The whole place to yourself. He'd posted one photo. It was blurry. A man was holding up a rainbow trout, but it was grotesque, almost deformed with an oversized head. Its eyes, even in the blurry photo, seemed bright. In the background, the lake water was a strange, blackish blue. In the comments, someone asked for the coordinates. PDX Angler 88 replied, "Follow Old Bear Creek up the mountain until the road ends." Then keep going. That post stuck in my head. I became obsessed. I cross-referenced topographical maps and finally found it. A small bean-shaped body of water with no name. The logging road he mentioned looked like a faint scar. It took me 2 weeks to plan. I told my girlfriend, Clara, I was going camping off-grid. "Ben, this place doesn't even have a name on the map," she said. "What if you get hurt? Or your truck breaks down?" "You know the Tacoma won't let me down," I said. "I'll have a first aid kit, flares. I'll be fine." 3 days of total quiet. She finally relented. "Promise me you'll be careful. And text me the second you have service." "Promise," I said. I wish to God I had listened to her. I left on a Friday morning. The drive took 6 hours. 4 on the highway, then 2 more navigating old logging roads. The tree branches scraped against my truck, and my cell service vanished. This place was definitely off the grid. I parked where the road was finally swallowed by an old landslide. I grabbed my pack, my gear, my inflatable kayak, and hiked the last half mile. When I stepped out of the trees, I was stunned. The place was pristine. The lake was set in a granite bowl, ringed by massive pine trees. But the first thing I noticed was the silence. Not quiet. Silence. No birds chirping, no insects. Just a light wind. The lack of sound made my ears ring. The water was a blackish blue, so dark it barely reflected the sky. "Wow," I whispered, and my voice sounded loud. I set up camp about 50 yards from the shore. By mid-afternoon, I'd inflated the kayak, assembled my rod, and pushed out onto the water. The water was freezing. I paddled to the middle. The water was black. I dropped my anchor, and my 150-foot line just kept unspooling until it was gone. My heart skipped. This little lake was impossibly deep. I started casting, and just like PDX Angler 88 had promised, third cast, something hit it, hard, My rod bent nearly in half. When I finally got it in, I couldn't believe my eyes. A rainbow trout. It must have been 28 inches, and it was thick. Exactly like the photo. Big head, burly body, and the eyes. A milky yellow. It barely fought as I pulled it into the boat. It just watched me. I was thrilled. I quickly caught 2 more, both monsters. I decided to keep one for dinner. As I released the last one, it didn't swim away. It just hovered by the kayak, its big mouth slowly opening and closing. It stared at me with those milky yellow eyes. A weird chill went down my spine. "Go on," I said, nudging it with the paddle. It slowly turned and vanished into the black water. As the sun started to set, the air turned cold. A fog began to rise from the water like steam from dry ice. Within minutes, the entire lake was covered. I paddled back to shore. My excitement was replaced by a sense of unease. The silence of this place felt heavy. I cleaned the trout and started a fire. The flames sputtered weakly. I grilled the fish, trying to enjoy it, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I kept glancing into the darkness beyond the firelight, and then I heard it. A sound. A low-frequency thrum. It was so low, I felt it in my chest more than I heard it with my ears. Thum. 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 It seemed to come from the lake. I stood up, heart pounding. "Hello?" I called out, feeling stupid. Only the thum, 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 replied. It sounded like a massive diesel engine idling somewhere far away, but I was miles from civilization. I tried to rationalize it. Geology? Atmosphere? But a primal fear was overriding my logic. I cleaned up dinner, doused the fire, and climbed into my tent. I'd brought my Glock 10mm. I took it out, checked the magazine, and placed it next to my sleeping bag. I lay there in the dark, listening. Hum. 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 It didn't stop. It was like a giant, slow heartbeat coming from the earth itself. My head started to ache. Eventually, exhaustion won. I woke up cold. Sunlight was filtering through the tent, but the air inside was freezing. And silence. The thrum was gone. I felt relieved. "Geez, Ben," I said aloud. "Must have been a high-altitude migraine." I unzipped the tent and stepped outside. And I froze. Everything in my campsite had been moved. My cooler was now in the middle of the clearing. My utensils were arranged in a neat straight line. Knife, fork, spoon, plate, cup, in that order. But that wasn't the scary part. Around the perimeter of my campsite was a perfect circle. It was made of fish bones. Hundreds of tiny, perfectly clean fish skeletons, arranged head to tail in a circle enclosing my tent. I backed away, feeling sick. This wasn't a bear. This was something intelligent, something that had waited for me to fall asleep. I pulled the Glock from its holster. "Okay," I whispered, my voice shaking. "Time to go. Right now." I started stuffing my sleeping bag into its sack. As I was packing, I heard a splash, a loud splash, from the lake. I stood still, gun aimed at the water. Splash. Closer this time. Through the thin fog, I could see something moving. A dark shape gliding under the surface. It was moving in a zigzag pattern, as if it was searching. Splash, splash, splash. The monster trout were jumping out of the water. Dozens of them, but they seemed to be trying to escape. They launched themselves onto the shore, flopping on the rocks, before convulsing back into the dark water. And then I saw it. The middle of the lake. A huge ripple spread outwards. As if a giant boulder had been dropped in, a massive bubble rose to the surface and burst, releasing a cloud of foul-smelling smell. The stench of rotten eggs and dead fish, but worse, an ancient rot. I covered my mouth, trying not to gag. That's when I heard the voice. It was in my head, not words. An urge into the water. "Come to us. It is deep." I stumbled back. "No," I whimpered. The urge grew stronger, pulling at my mind, drawing me toward the bank. I found myself taking a step toward it. I screamed and aimed the pistol at the water. "Get away from me!" I pulled the trigger. Boom! The shot was deafening. It echoed off the granite walls, crack boom. The urge in my head vanished. Cut off! There was only the echo and then a new sound. A roar, a wet, deep sound coming from the lake itself. It sounded like stones grinding together under 1,000 feet of water. It shook the ground. I didn't wait. I left everything. The tent, the cooler, the fishing gear. I just grabbed my backpack. It still had my wallet and keys, and my gun. I ran. I ran through the forest, back toward the trail. I didn't look back. I could hear it. Behind me. A wet, dragging sound. Slosh, drag, slosh, drag. It was coming out of the water. I could smell it. The overpowering stench was following me. Oh God, I muttered. I tripped, smashing my knee on a rock. The pain was intense, but the adrenaline kept me going. I got up and kept running. I could hear it moving through the brush. It was big, and it was fast. Branches snapped. I reached the landslide where my truck was parked. Slosh, drag. It was right behind me. I could feel its cold, foul breath on the back of my neck. I didn't dare look. I knew if I saw it, I would die. I hit the unlock button. The beep beep was the most beautiful sound I'd ever heard. I dove into the cab, slammed the door, and hit the locks. I jammed the key in the ignition. My hands were shaking. Thud. Something slammed into the side of the truck. A hit so hard the whole vehicle rocked. I screamed. The engine turned over. I threw it in reverse, tires spinning. Drag! Slam! It hit the tailgate. Glass shattered. My rear window exploded into a million pieces. I didn't stop. I floored it. The Tacoma roared, lurching forward. I drove like a maniac, crashing over rocks. I'd been driving for 5 minutes, heart ready to burst, when I realized I could still hear it. Not the dragging, the thrum. Thum, thum, thum. It was in the truck with me, I yelled, slamming on the brakes. I looked around the cab frantically. The sound, it was coming from the small bait cooler I'd tossed on the passenger seat. It was vibrating. The small plastic cooler was rattling on the seat, in time with the thumb, thumb, thumb in my head, and I remembered. The last trout I'd caught. The one that start. Story 3. The Hook on the Cold Earth Grave, North London. Early autumn. James and Will, professional anglers, dared to visit Silent Grove, a secluded lake forbidden due to bordering a tract of land rumored to be an unmarked, forgotten war cemetery. They set up camp directly beside a barren mound of earth, where a gnarled yew tree thrust its branches skyward like a skeletal finger. It was a singular, unmarked grave, and so profoundly cold that James felt the air around it thicken. "Focus on the fish, James. Please," Will hissed as James hesitated. They cast their lines into the water, where the surface was black and flat as a mirror. Around 2 in the morning, James's rod gave a violent, unnatural yank, not the pull of a fish. After a struggle, what he hauled out wasn't a fish, but something heavy and dead weight. The object was a large carp, but James's hook wasn't in its mouth. Instead, the hook had snagged on a piece of old, rusty barbed wire, which was cinched around the fish's jaw like a snare. When Will shone his flashlight on it, both men froze. The barbed wire wasn't just wrapped around the fish. It was entangled with another object, a decaying brass coat button, etched with a faded initial. It was jammed between the wire and a scrap of gray, military-grade woolen fabric. James flinched and dropped the button. The instant he touched it, a bone-deep, icy cold surged up his arm, as if he had plunged his hand into centuries-old ice water. "Get rid of it," Will whispered, horrified. They quickly cut the wire, tossed the button and the fish back into the lake, and packed up their gear. The unshakable cold James returned to his apartment in Notting Hill. Since that night, he was perpetually cold. An insidious, internal coldness that had nothing to do with the room's temperature, but seemed to emanate from within his very bones. The dreams began. Not images, but sensations. The feeling of being buried, of packed dirt pressing against his chest, and the rank smell of trench mud. He woke up every morning with the phantom sensation of lying in a deep hole, and the entire room reeked of damp earth. Worse, he started hearing a sound. A faint, rhythmic metallic clinking, like a loose button being shaken. It came from the corners of his room, from behind the walls, and sometimes right next to his ear. One night, trying desperately to sleep, James woke up startled by the overpowering scent of dirt. Moonlight filtered through the blinds. He looked down at the hardwood floor. A dark, muddy streak ran from his bedroom door, across the rug, and stopped directly beneath the edge of his bed. It wasn't shoe mud. It looked as though someone had dipped a finger in mud and drawn a long line on the floor. James leaped out of bed and flipped on the light. The mud streak was gone. Only the clean wooden floor remained. But when he turned around, on the white wall opposite, there was a new mark. This time the mud wasn't a streak, but scrawled messy letters, as if written in haste by a trembling finger. Sergeant R.A. S. claiming what is. His James knew he couldn't escape. The chilling cold and the metallic clinking were now constant companions. He grabbed his flashlight and moved to the living room, where the clinking was loudest. The beam of the flashlight landed in the center of the rug. Lying there was not the fish or the barbed wire. It was the old brass coat button. It rested precisely in the middle of the room, looking as if it had just been placed there. As James stared at the button, it didn't move. Yet he felt as if an invisible force was pinning him to the spot. And then, he saw it. Around the button, mud began to bubble up. The muddy tendrils didn't spill out. They seemed to rise out of the floorboards, slowly crawling up the wall. A whisper echoed, not from a mouth, but from the very coldness suffocating him. The voice sounded like grinding gravel. "You woke me and you took my token. You touched me. Now you must pay with warmth." The mud trails on the wall converged, forming a final, terrifying word directly above James's head. "Comrade." At the same moment, James caught his reflection in the window glass. He wasn't alone. Directly behind him, a black mud-soaked shadow was stretching out a skeletal hand. On its finger, James saw a small, sharp fishhook gleaming in the darkness.